Hey, and welcome to The Solid Verbal. Now would be a perfect time to consider subscribing. Yeah, that little subscribe button for year-round premium college football content. That's it. Here's the video. Enjoy. Subscribe.
Where are we at with LSU? Brian Kelly, year one.
Okay, so look, we'll start with the quarterback battle. Jayden Daniels is seasoned. He's played in big games. He's won big games. He has the most starts of these guys. Garrett Nussmeier has upside, has played a little bit, not huge, not a big physical force. There's nobody, it seems obvious at the moment, unless Nussmeier really just has a command that he offers them the upside that is needed with this receiver room, which looks to be really promising, led by Kayshon Boutte, probably one of the best 3 receivers in the country. I don't know, something in that range. It's a good receiver. You're 5 receivers in the country, but he's among the country's best for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
The offensive line, I think, was a question, but has rounded into shape. I'm not as worried about the offensive line at this point than I was, I think, a little while ago. Still a question, but I think the upside is very clearly there, and they have a left tackle of the future. So there's a lot to actually like about LSU on offense, especially John Emery, the former 5-star running back. He seems to be turning a corner, and so I think they're in good shape. Now, what we can say about, and you can talk about Notre Dame stuff with Brian Kelly offenses, but even without consistently finding a great receiver, even without consistently figuring out who the best quarterback is or should be, that there's a certain amount of organization, offensive line development, and ultimately it doesn't cost them winning a ton of games. That the floor is still extremely high most years with Brian Kelly offenses because he tends to hire pretty good coordinators, not always, but he tends to sort of have a very specific vision for his offenses, a lot going to the tight end. There have been years where Brian Kelly has found that, game-changing receiver. You look at, early on with Michael Floyd and Golden Tate, that overlapped, right, between Charlie Weiss and Brian Kelly, and then more recently Chase Claypool. Guys like that have emerged, and he's inheriting Kayshon Boutte. He's inheriting a number of super promising younger receivers. So I don't think finding that guy will be as difficult. It is just locking in on that quarterback position, which is not to say that it's a small deal, but the big if he's able to relatively early on, before the season, early on in the season, I don't know. There's a lot to really like about, especially because he hit the portal hard on both sides of the ball. If the depth appears to be there like it, or if the depth is there like it appears to be now, I don't know, man. I don't see the offense holding them back to a significant degree. If he wavers a bunch at quarterback, sure, absolutely. Your point obviously stands. But I don't know. I see this as a little bit harder to screw up than going like, should I go Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner or Jack Cohn? Like, this is the floor with these guys, with this decision seems quite a bit higher.
Yeah, it's not apples to apples in that sense.
No.
Right. I mean, there is so much talent across the board, and especially at quarterback, even though there is some confusion. And even though I joke, it will continue to joke about his inability to pick one and stick with one, whoever they pick, they'll probably be fine. They'll probably be fine.
Any of those guys is probably an upgrade over where Notre Dame was last year. Yeah?
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be fine with pretty much any of these guys. Curious to see what he does. Where he gets himself into trouble is because he tries to play too many. And he'll inevitably do the package thing where it's like, I've got a package for Jayden Daniels, and he's going to play that guy in a big spot, in a big game. He's going to do well. He's going to perform because they always perform. And then suddenly it's going to be a gigantic mess. Who do we start? When do we start? And what does this thing look like? We don't know who's running the ship, and that's how things go a little bit sideways. But there's just so much talent elsewhere that, as you said, I think it's hard for me to envision them truly screwing up. The floor is high with Brian Kelly. A lot of people don't like him. He is a good coach. He's got a track record.
Oh, yeah.
He's won everywhere he's been. So I think they'll be just fine. I agree with the organization and development points, all of which you raised, I think, and said the right things. Are they going to beat Florida State in week 1?
Yeah. Yeah, they will. It's in New Orleans. There are enough really impressive faces on this defense that I'd be more worried about Jordan Travis throwing into this defense. LSU gets after it. They should be getting after it on the edge. They brought in transfers. They lost guys on defense. There are new faces, but I don't know. They seem stacked on the defensive line. Linebacker has a good amount of upside. A lot of faces lost, but a lot of faces in. They get a top corner from Oklahoma State coming in. They get guys from Arkansas. I think they're going to be in good shape. There are so many new faces, though, because honestly, it was needed. You remember the stories going into the bowl game against Kansas State? We're like, they have 31 guys available, where, not even exaggerating, it was right around that number, that they needed numbers, and Brian Kelly needed to hit the portal. It seemed pretty necessary. So I think they're going to be in a good spot. Now, Florida State's in a tougher spot situationally just because of where the game is and how much is unknown about what LSU is going to look like, from the top down. What are they going to look like on offense? Who's going to be playing quarterback? But I like Matt House. He has helped to solidify the Kentucky defense. And, when you have that kind of consistency and that kind of buy-in from Kentucky, I think you're going to see it from LSU. And look, if you can rush the passer and if you have speed in the secondary, yeah, I think they're going to beat Florida State. I think they're going to be a good team. I think the asterisk with LSU is whether it's because of the quarterback battle, whether it's going to be because of the newness of it all, that they'll lose 1 to 3 games because their act is just not together as a program under Brian Kelly, that everybody's just not on the same page yet. So I have them maxing out around 9 wins, but I have them in that 8 or 9 win range. The schedule, again, everybody's got that meaty middle, but the schedule with Florida State early, at Auburn, Tennessee from the East, Florida, of course, from the East, and Florida's on the road, and we don't know all that much about Florida at the moment. We had that crazy shootout last year where somehow LSU was able to get a ton on the ground and still not win the game, just a turnover palooza. Ole Miss, Bama, at Arkansas, and then there's the supposed down week. It's UAB for LSU this year, a new coach for UAB, of course, and then on the road at A&M. So a really tough schedule, but I think secretly, maybe not so secretly, I don't know. It's not a secret to LSU fans, but I think there's a good amount of star power with this LSU team, especially given the circumstances of how much turnover they've had on this roster over the past couple years. Young guys, made green mistakes last year and are now coming into their own. And so there's a good amount to like about this LSU team if they can find, I think, answers in the secondary consistently and on the offensive line. But I think they're in a good place.
Yeah, generally speaking, LSU and Florida feel very similar to me in that there's a perception whenever you turn over a coach that either the bottom has fallen out on a program or that there is some sort of systemic issue that's going to take a while to rebuild. Right. I don't think that's the case in either place. I think both of the cupboards are pretty well stocked, and it's not going to be a huge rebuild on either side. Both are taking over. Both have good coaches taking over in Billy Napier and in this case, Brian Kelly. And I think before long, we'll see both of those programs on the rise. LSU is going to be in a good spot. The over-under, by the way, is 7, even 7. It feels like a stretch to me that they would go below that 7. So we'll talk more about this, as I've been saying here. We're going to do an over-under show as we get a little bit closer to the season. But LSU is one that I'm interested in with that over because they're not a 6-6 team, Dan. Even if things go south, they're not a 6-6 team.
The case for them being somewhat disappointing in year one is just how many new faces, both on the sideline and on the field, are being thrown together to figure things out kind of all at once. That the offensive line is going to need some time to gel. That the secondary is going to need some time to gel. That the receiver room, while strong, it's sorting out who's who.
Yeah.
While the quarterbacks seem like they have a high floor, who's actually the guy, right? That there's so many just gelling questions at hand that they might have a disappointing opening half of the season and then get their act together in the back half. That's entirely possible for just as many new pieces being thrown into Baton Rouge.